Okay, so we talked last time about the subtle body and the super subtle, and you had the reading in the Book of the Dead introduction. So hopefully you understand that. And just to review that a little bit, to rehearse it, you have the idea that, I think I made the point that I think I made the point that what Tantra is, therefore, why it's called the swift path, is that it compresses millions of lifetimes into a single lifetime in the optimal and very rare case, into 7, 3, or 7, or 16 lifetimes. They say when you are initiated into unexcelled yoga tantra, any particular one of them, maximum length of time to Buddhahood is 16 lifetimes if you can keep your vows in the next 15 life, in the present life in which you receive it, in the next 15. That's maximum time. And in an exceptional case, you can attain in one life or a few lives, or in the between state after the one life and so on. They say, which is a huge acceleration. It's sort of like genetic engineering, you could say, from inward science, inner science, and inner art or technologies, form of genetic engineering. And therefore, these tantric deities, multiple arms, multiple faces, multiple legs sometimes, male and female both together. These kind of deities are templates, you could say, for kind of genetic engineering, if you will. And why? Because in the super subtle and subtle planes, in a single session of meditation, like through a night, let's say, of an advanced yogin who's doing perfection stage practices, having prepared for some lengthy time with creation stage practices, they can die and be reborn and die and be reborn and die and be reborn like 100 times. Just say, like you run the life, death, rebirth, life, death, rebirth, life, death, rebirth cycle like in super speed, like you took a camera, the 16 millimeter or like 6 millimeter camera, movie camera that's running, and then you just speed it up and run through a 2-hour movie in 2 minutes, sort of thing, like just blaze through all the different changes and images and something like that on the subtle plane. Just like you could have a dream, and in the dream you could die in the dream and then sort of wander around next after feeling like you died, and then be in another place or in another body and do something else, because it's just the consciousness, the embodiment of the consciousness is just a very super subtle energy body which can change according to the concept of the mind. It isn't that there's no material. A dream body has a material, a super subtle material thing, just like a projection on a screen in a movie theater. The flickering images, which look like the hero doing something, going in and out of his spaceship or living room or whatever it is, the reflected illusory image of a real bunch of people there doing something on the screen, it's not a bunch of people with regular bodies in a coarse reality. It's a subtle reality of the play of light on the screen, if you follow me. It happens in a movie, right? So there's still some kind of energy there. And so they have a kind of light bodies, which you see in the movie, right? As an illusion. Or just like what you see on the surface of a mirror when you see your own face. There is something there in the mirror. It's just it's like a play of light on the surface of the mirror, which is a kind of body. It's a form, right? So when you become a master yogin in these advanced stages of Tantra, you can work consciously at the level of those very, very subtle forms, if you follow me, and reshape your body and interact with beings on that super subtle plane. And if you read the Jataka tales, which I did recommend to all of you who were here in the earlier parts of the class, that there's 500 Jataka tales in the Pali, translated from Pali literature, available from the Pali Text Society. I think 3 volumes translated by E.B. Cowell, who was a great translator in the late 19th, early 20th century. And but they're in the series in the Pali Text Society, so a little bit old-fashioned Edwardian English, but perfectly readable. And I recommend that you read them because reading them gives you a feeling about how things that happen to beings in other bodies in former lives set up patterns that then come into repeating themselves in certain ways in the present life. And then there's a lot of larger literature than what is called the Avadana literature, the Itivrtaka literature. You know, there's other bodies of literature than the Jatakas. There's 3 or 4 bodies of literature in the 12 branches of Buddhist literature. Sometimes 9 or 12 branches they have of the Buddhist literature. Huge bunch of tales and story, like animal tales, really. The original Aesops are there in the Jataka tales, actually. And I recommend you read it because reading those narratives begins to give you a kind of more common sense feeling about the commonsensical nature of succession of lives, the multi-life perspective. Whereas because we are all raised to have a commonsensical feeling that just the one life is really all that I can really be sure about. But actually, the more you read Jataka tales, the more you get a sense of there are these multiple lives. And there's no point in doing Tantra and rushing to genetically transform with the inner genetic engineering which Tantra is, to transform your embodiment and leap thousands of evolutionary lifetimes ahead in a single life, in the subtle plane, unless you think there is a multiple life plane. Anyway, hello, how are you? I'm glad you survived between the Scylla and Charybdis of Gulen and Erdogan. One on this rock, one on that rock, the two embattled demonic fit fellows, supposedly. And we have some more new ones now, all over the place. Okay, I won't get into that. All right? So then, so for example, one thing also that is really wonderful, there was something I wanted to say today in the sort of preliminary part of the talk about Milarepa. You know, Jetsun Milarepa. How many of you have read the life of Milarepa, for example? 2 of you, 3 of you, in the Lalungba translation, or there's a new one by Quintman, I think. But the older one, my favorite, is by the Tibetan guy, Losang Lalungba, I think originally published by Dutton. Now there is a newer one by a younger scholar. It's not bad either. But the best one, I still think, is the Lalungpa, Lhalungpa, Losang Punsok Lalungpa. Life of Milarepa, Tibet's Great Yogi, or Life of Milarepa. The older one by Evans Wentz is a little something. He is considered by the Tibetans to be the first ordinary Tibetan to attain Buddhahood in one lifetime. In other words, there were earlier Tibetans he lived in the 11th, 12th century. There were earlier Tibetans who were considered Buddhas, disciples of Padmasambhava, but almost all of them were thought by the Tibetans to already be great bodhisattvas who just incarnated in Tibet, sort of type of thing. So they sort of saved the idea of like an ordinary, naughty Tibetan, shifting from being an ordinary, naughty person, and a Tibetan kind of a folk singer, rock and roll singer, drinking and doing sorcery and doing evil things even. Murdered people, actually. He was a murderer by sorcery in his youth. And, well, he was kind of happy-go-lucky fellow. He wasn't a malicious person. He just happened to murder some people, egged on by various, vengeance sort of thing, tribal vengeance thing. And yet from there, he went all the way to complete Buddhahood. And he lived for many years in mountain caves, more or less stark naked. And why was he in all these mountain caves all the time and meditating all the time? Because, just as the great adepts of India, the Mahasiddhas of India, they lived in charnel grounds, like the equivalent of cemeteries and caves, and for usually 12 years is a very symbolic time. And they lived in such settings because this enabled them to adventure in their inner cosmos, as psychonauts, as I like to call them, like astronauts. And live and die, live and die, live and die, and do the between state meditatively without actually dying, but in a subtle plane to advance their evolution in an enormously accelerated way, which is what Tantra is really all about. Okay? So Milarepa is a perfect example of that. Murdered 35 people by sorcery in his youth, supposedly, and then had a huge period of ordeals inflicted by his teacher as a kind of penance for this kind of very sinful activity of killing these evil people in his family who had deprived his mother and so on. And then, however, made huge effort after receiving really great teaching from a great teacher, and finally became Buddha, probably in his 50s or late 40s. And then was a huge teacher and founded an enormously magnificent tradition. So I wanted to mention that. And the other thing I wanted to mention that Milarepa exemplifies, and those of you who are interested in Tantra should think carefully about this, which is that the other thing about Tantra is, in order to do this, you need a guru who initiates you, who himself was initiated by an authentic guru, and you have to do a practice of visualizing that guru as indivisible from Vajradhara, that is sort of the tantric sort of ultimate Buddha form, although there are many such archetype forms, but the Vajradhara is sort of one simple one. Just 2 arms, 1 face, 2 legs, etc. And then that creates a complication and it leads to abuse, which is usually a 2-sided affair. It's not only a manipulative guru who's really not quite that capable, or rather who may be capable and have an authentic transmission, but also has human flaws. So they're a kind of vessel to channel something that is really marvelous, and they themselves are quite marvelous even, but they're human and they can be led into temptation, let's say. And then disciple who is projecting like a transference, parental daddy, mommy transference on such a teacher, and thereby becomes overly dependent on that teacher and puts them in a situation of excessive authority outside the ritual setting, where there is like, this is a Buddha talking to me, this is indivisible from a Buddha talking to me. It's very important to be able to visualize to fully receive the initiation. But then outside that, when they're walking down the street or when they're demanding a Cadillac or a Rolls Royce or they're asking for for services or whatever, all the scandal things that have happened and that happened in Asia as well in the past, and will happen probably more still in the future, even worldwide, now that these traditions are worldwide. So it's a complicated thing. It's not simplistic. Like Tibetans have a saying, the best guru is one who lives at least 3 valleys away. In other words, they come and give you the initiation, and if they leave and they don't sit there and order you around in the kitchen, and so on, etc., and therefore you can think of them as exalted, and you can sort of remember them from the ritual context in the mandala. When you in the mandala, when you receive the initiation, as indivisible from the central figure in the mandala, but you don't have to see their human faults, and they don't have to be tempted to use that sort of charisma that you set through them, because really what you're reaching to is the Buddha, Vajradhara through them. And really there's something like a statue like that. The human being becomes a walking, talking statue for you. Now that statue is made of clay, and it's really well made according to, authentic, architectural, physiological dimensions and so forth, like a proper Buddha. But it's just made of clay and it has the faults, It's not, oh, that statue is perfect. If the statue suddenly talked to me, I'd have to do whatever it said, even if it was unethical or stupid. And yet that statue reminds me of the Buddha, so I can have a sense of the nearness of the Buddha with that statue, right? But then I don't have to think that statue is the Buddha, in a way. The over-dependence on tantric gurus, which is a religion created by the student, and then sometimes exploited by less than perfect teachers, is really like idolatry, basically. It's like thinking that this person, who is a human being, even if they're called Tulku or something, Rinpoche, but still they're human, and they might be an emanation of the Buddha, but they're an emanation of the Buddha as a human. And therefore, when they are thought of as a perfect Buddha living right there, because in the ritual, they are just a channel to Vajradhara, who's the perfect Buddha in that setting. But that doesn't mean when they go to the bathroom, they're necessarily perfect Buddha. And you have to go in and accompany them and wipe their butts. It doesn't mean that. They're not in the ritual setting that time. This is where I love the Dalai Lama. He's so honest and so wonderful, and some of my teachers, I think, have been wonderful, and I'll give several examples. For example, the one teacher who I already mentioned to you, Taratoku, who gave that brilliant thing about the most simple thing of what is Tantra, where he said, in the exoteric Buddhism, we are using wisdom primarily, and always combined with compassion, but using wisdom to destroy the world built on ignorance. After that world has been destroyed, the world built on ignorance, we have Tantra to rebuild it on the basis of wisdom, to remake the world, the buildings, the bodies, the beings, everything out of wisdom, seeing them as indivisible from different wisdom energies. Which is, he made that brilliant statement, which I think I mentioned to you earlier. And he also used to do something when he would give an initiation, precisely to avoid either the overdependence from the disciple or himself being led into temptation to manipulate people who are being overly devotional to him. He would say, I am too flawed, I am authentically allowed to give this initiation. And so you can authentically receive it if you have the right attitude. However, I am too flawed a human being to really do that. And therefore, what you should think of me when you receive this initiation, you should do something more complicated than just see me as one with, Buddha Vajradhara or whatever initiation it was. And that is, in one way, to get the initiation, you have to see Buddha Vajradhara as alive in me, here and now, yes. But then you should see me as an emanation of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So he is taking the burden of giving you this initiation. And your sort of orientation reaches out to him, who's always definitely at least 3 valleys and 6 security people far away. So you can't overly hang around with him, because he's too much needed by too many people and so on. So that meant that he, even in that moment, where the less scrupulous and less intelligent guru will want to I'm the Buddha, Because in a way, they have to think they themselves are indivisible with the Buddha when they do it. They also have to be visualizing, imagining that to whatever degree they're capable of visualizing it. And so, I'm the Buddha, so then everybody should do what I say. And another example is, so that was Taratoku's beautiful thing, which was so much, and even students would be like, oh no, don't say that, we want to think you're the one, Guruji. He would step out of line. Then the Dalai Lama himself, when he first gave Kalachakra in America, in Wisconsin, he reached the point in the ritual where he put on his hat, he said, now I'm your guru, now you have to do what I say. Then he took off his hat, and he said that in Tibetan, and had it translated, and he said it in a very magisterial manner. And then he changed his tone of voice, took off the hat, scratched his head, said, I don't like this hat, it's uncomfortable. And then he said, except if I say something stupid, you don't have to do it. In a perfectly normal tone of voice. And a lot of the fanatic types were like, oh, he destroyed the whole atmosphere of the initiation. Oh, now I can think of him as the ultimate daddy. Oh, this terrible. Oh, he's brought me down. You can see on their faces they're all deflated. But actually what he's doing is he's putting the burden back on the student by doing that. Another time with some Indian students, he was giving a Tara blessing, a kind of initiation. And he said, well, this is great, we're going to do a Tara blessing now, except I don't have any blessing for you, he said. I'm not capable of giving you a blessing. And they're like, oh, Then he says, why? Because you already have the blessing. This ritual just gives you an excuse to think of it as if you're receiving from me. But I don't send blessings. It's actually in you, the Tara energy. The Buddha awareness is in you. And this gives you an excuse to let it come out even in a special setting. Again, stepping out of using the esoteric, secret, wonderful tantric thing as a subtle way of dominating people, which is the great danger about it, right? Which is why they say, I think I've said this, and maybe in the other class, I hope I haven't. Always, if I'm repeating myself, please do hold up your hand and say, you said this last time or something. Because I can't remember. too old, you know. But anyway, he said, and then I forgot what I was going to say. What was I? I lost track. Yeah. So the point is the initial practice in the today we're going to talk mainly about, now we're not really talking so much about action tantra, which means ritual action tantra, kriya tantra. We're not so much talking about charya tantra, which means semi-ritual, semi-contemplative, performance tantra, which I call it. We're not talking, or conduct tantra, you could say. We're not talking about yoga tantra necessarily. We're talking about unexcelled yoga tantra. And unexcelled yoga tantra in the new tantric schools, which is Kadam, Kagyu, Sakya, Gelug, those four, and I think Bumbo also. Although, because, you know, Bumbo are kind of complicated. They're Buddhists outside of Tibet, but then they're not Buddhists inside Tibet. Or they're non-Buddhist Buddhists. I mean, it's very complicated to explain, and I don't want to go into it. But they have unexcelled yoga tantra. And then in the Nyingma, the old school, which is only the one school, they have Maha Yoga Tantra, Anu Yoga Tantra, and Ati Yoga Tantra. They have those three kinds. But those are parallel to the creation and perfection stages of the new schools. There's anybody who says that that what the new schools have, the Nyingmas don't, or what the Nyingmas have, the new schools don't. That's a root of sectarianism, and it's really inaccurate. You know, they all have the complete path to Buddhahood. That's the root of non-sectarianism. You know, they just explain it in little different ways, and I'll explain, I think, how that fits. Although perhaps it's controversial, and someone would like to debate with me, which we will see if who can win that debate. Okay? So we're going to talk mainly today about creation stage, and one of the things that I sent you, and creation stage means a practice where you exchange or you move in your mind meditatively out of the world, out of your own identity of yourself as an ordinary person, and out of the world of this ordinary planet rotating around the sun, you know, with like all kind of weird leaders of different countries and having conflicts and having climate change and never mind the whole sort of atlas holding up your world picture, you know, in your mind that goes along with your identity as one of the ordinary suffering beings in this world, whatever version of it you consider that it's sort of in the background of your consciousness, whether or not you think about it, you know, you locate yourself in a certain cosmic picture. So you critically leave that cosmic picture, and then you move into a new cosmic picture, and in this picture that you have on the screen there, which I'm sorry you may not be able to see too well because of the lighting, but never mind. In this picture, the circle there around, you see the circle outside? What that actually is an enclosure of an entire universe. Not even just a galaxy or a solar system, it's a whole universe. And it has, these are rings of wind, fire, water, and earth, and vajras, you know, and then sort of supernova energy, like fusion energy, you know, and, you know, making a barrier that nothing can come from another universe into it. And then the gardens in this particular version outside the building, and then this square thing is the wall of the main building, and there's only one building in this particular mandala, some have more than one. And the garden part inside that circle is like the whole planet or that whole universe, the whole landscape of that universe. And this one doesn't have charnel grounds because it's the esoteric community for some reason. I don't want to get into that. And then the central mandala square part, the tic-tac-toe in the middle, and the four gates and everything. This is the palace where the sort of deity of that universe lives. And the idea is you leave the ordinary universe and you then come into this universe in which you're completely safe and secure. You're completely exalted and majestic. Remember in the Vimalakirti Sutra, where before teaching the inconceivable liberation, Vimalakirti seated everyone in thrones that were 3,400,000 leagues high. In order to sit on them, everybody became 4,200,000 leagues tall. Remember that? What was the point of that almost inconceivable dimension warp thing? Well, the idea was by being so super tall, bigger than even the planet, or even their old model of the planet, Mount Meru, etc., the Axel Mountain, etc., you have a great sense of self-confidence. You're like a giant. You're like exalted. You're like, if a planet blew up, it would be like a flea on your toe or something. If you're 4,200,000 leagues tall, you don't worry about a supernova somewhere. It'd be like, oh, that's an itch, like a mosquito bite. So you're feeling, it was simulating an initiatory thing, where you're simulating a sense of safety and security and self-confidence, rather than our normal self-identity where we're very vulnerable and is the bus going to run over me, is my taxi going to have an auto accident, is the subway going to collapse, we're going to have a flood or a hurricane or right, a terrorist or something. We all run around feeling very vulnerable, right? So this is making you feel like that. And the reason being that the inconceivable liberation teaching is this sort of miracle, subtle body, subtle mind, subtle universe plane, even though it's not overtly tantric or overtly esoteric. The Mahayana Sutras have all the seeds of this esoteric thing, as even the Pali Sutras do. Buddha does different kinds of demonstrations in Pali Sutras that indicate like this sort of subtle universe that the tantric science opens up. So it's all present there. Buddha didn't withhold it even from his Theravada students at all. But he doesn't call it Tantra because he doesn't want people to have that kind of commitment, and they're not ready for that, and they're also non-dualist, and also they're not heavily into cultivating compassion. They're mainly focusing on wisdom. And then they will come to compassion, of course, inevitably. That's his plan. But he's not overtly saying, oh, this is some high esoteric thing now, using your imagination, imagine you're 400,000 leagues tall. But the event in the chapter of the sutra, and many more in the Avatamsaka, the Huayan Sutra, the flower ornament or the flower Buddha garland sutra, many more events are like that, taking the imagination into seeing this totally extraordinary. We read them, so seeing the world as this extraordinary place, like a mandala place, with Buddhas kind of everywhere, right? That's already in the exoteric, in other words, world, that is. Okay? So that's what the mandala actually is. And then the practice, now I'm going to go off this text, and I'm going to, I want to hide PowerPoint. It won't let me. Okay, I will do this then. Bleep, go away, PowerPoint. Without closing. I don't want to close you. I just want you to go away. Oh, it's being possessive. Oh, I know, because I have to move out of this. I know what. Okay. Now, it has a few slides there. You can see. Please leave my screen. Why won't PowerPoint leave?
Full screen mode.
What?
If you get it out of full screen mode, you should go full screen escape. Like that.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, because I want this one. Because what we're going to do now is the creation stage. And I want this one all over the screen. And this is a section from Central Tibetan Buddhism where I give some published already exoterically, so the Dakinis won't kill me. Something on the creation stage, okay? And so first, the quintessential segment, a few verses in the Lama Puja, Guru Puja, Lama Chopa. It says, then bless me to embark in the boat to cross the ocean of the Tantras, through the kindness of the Captain Vajra Master, holding vows and pledges root of all powers, more dearly than life itself. So that's just sort of turning to Tantra, having sort of done, remember, the 3 things you need to be able to do Tantra. You need some degree of transcendent renunciation, where you're not whipped around by your lust and anger and irritation and not completely enclosed in your egocentric delusion. You need some degree of compassion, bodhisattva mind. You actually really need the bodhisattva spirit or mind and some degree of that. And to be sure that when you get into this subtle plane, that will be compassion, will be your horse, your energy, not any kind of seeking of power or egocentric thing. And then you need some degree of wisdom of emptiness, of selflessness, so that you will not get stuck in a divine identity, and also your imagination will not be trapped in your ordinary identity, where you're just sort of playing around having a fantasy, but you can't really shift imaginatively into this other world that you have to do to be able to really release yourself from your normal low self-esteem identity and self-identity into a sort of self-confident identity. So you need those 3 prerequisites, which he had in the Guru Puja. And then after, wisdom being the 3rd, wisdom of the twofold selflessness, he then says, now let me get in the boat to cross the ocean of Tantra. Kindness of the captain, Vajra master, holding vows and pledges, root of all power, more dearly than life itself. Now the Tibetans, I'm not saying that all the lamas are bad or anything like that. I'm just saying the Tibetans in Tibet, this esoteric Tantra, they would pretty freely initiate even lay people who weren't necessarily going to be yogis, because the idea was they were not learned, they didn't have those prerequisites, and so they received these things as a kind of blessing. Planting a seed on their subconscious is what the Guru thinks about it as. They don't really think these students are going to become like great yogis necessarily, maybe some exceptional one. But mainly it's kind of like a blessing thing that they did. And also, the more advanced students, there was very little abuse, because most of those reincarnate lamas were monks, mostly, for example, and celibate, therefore, mostly. Most tantrics, even in India, were monks. They weren't all like running around in a loincloth like the Mahasiddhas, the great adepts. And even among the Mahasiddhas, a lot of them were monks and remained monks, so that they didn't actually have physical partners. They had what they call subtle body partners, or they visualized themselves as both partners, in the part where you're doing the yoga, where you're bringing up the subconscious erotic energies. And so the sort of idea that tantrikas, like they throw away their monk's robe and rush off to have a big happy time having sex, is wrong, completely wrong, actually. That's not at all the case. And but I'm saying, therefore, an abuse in Tibet was relatively rare, because the lamas were monks. There was a whole monastic thing. And indeed, even when you give an initiation, if the student is not already well studied in the Tantra and knows exactly what the vows are and the commitments of taking the initiation, they don't actually receive it. They get a blessing. And it's a catch-22 there, because until they've received that blessing, they shouldn't really study it intensively in the ancient tradition. And so they can't learn what they are, because they can't study it until they get the initiation. But then they don't really receive it the first time, when they don't really know more about it, what's really going on. So it's a matter of repeating. And if you go in Tibetan circles, like in one of the monasteries in India or somewhere, Dalai Lama's temple in Dharamsala, receive initiation, the older lamas in the front rows are the ones who are flipping out and having a really awesome time. And they already received the initiation like 10 times, 5 times. And they had this progressive where they received, they practiced, they learned, they studied, and then they really mean it, when they know what's going on, and they can really even visualize it and so forth. And sort of it's a system like that, that's all I'm saying. And that doesn't make it bad or make it worthless to anybody. It just means it's something it takes a lot of doing to really do it. You can't just like go out there and go on TV and give initiation, and everyone's got it and they all want to flip out. No way. And that's why Dalai Lama, when he gives like the huge Kala Chakra initiation, which he always says he does based on the tradition that in the country of Shambhala, who were the first people who requested Shakyamuni Buddha in South India while he was teaching the Prajnaparamita Sutras in his monk body in North India, simultaneously he was in a Kala Chakra male-female body in South India, and he was teaching Kalachakra to the people from Shambhala, which is somewhere up around the North Pole or something. Like nobody knows where it is, a magic hidden country. And then every year, after a certain time, the king of Shambhala, who is himself an incarnation of a high bodhisattva, and they give a mass initiation to the whole citizenry of the country every year. They renew it, and so it's like a mass, kind of like a mass actually, like a Catholic mass in a way. But they're all yogis supposedly in Shambhala, and they have been for generations, thousands of years. And so on that basis, it became a tradition to very rarely in Tibet actually, in the lifetime of a Dalai Lama or a Panchen Lama, a large public mass initiation would be maybe once in a lifetime, or maximum almost twice. They would give it more often to the inner monks in one of the monasteries, but outside to the masses, very, very rare. So this present Dalai Lama, having done it 33 times, I think it is now at 34, 33, around that, is something unprecedented and extraordinary, actually. It's like, has to do with, it's complicated to explain why, but he had special visions and dreams in the early 60s that he should do that. And he had that special affinity. And the king of Shambhala, who was incarnation of Avalokiteshvara, like the Dalai Lama's incarnation of Avalokiteshvara, he wrote amazing commentary on the summary root Tantra. His commentary was called the Stainless Light Commentary. And his name was Pundarika in that lifetime. He was the 8th king of Shambhala. And his father, who was the 7th king, incarnation of Manjushri, told him, you have to write a commentary to this summary Tantra that I made to make it easier for people to study the root Tantra, because the root Tantra was so huge. And so this Dalai Lama has some link with that, but they haven't formally explained why or what. But that's in the comic book. It's in our graphic novel, why the Dalai Lama was given kind of a special authorization in a visionary thing to do many Kala Chakras on this planet at this time. So then the second verse is, bless me to perceive all things as the deity body, cleansing the taints of ordinary perception and conception through the yoga of the first stage of unexcelled Tantra, changing birth, death, and between, that's Bardo, between, into the 3 Buddha bodies, right? Now you all know the 3 Buddha bodies, right? From your Mahayana Sutras. Quiz? Who's going to tell me what they are? Come on. Yes?
What did you ask? I didn't hear.
What's that? The 3 Buddha bodies. Dharmakaya, yes. Sambhogakaya, Nirmanakaya. Right. Which I translate as truth body, beatific body, and emanation body. Those 3. And they're all one thing, actually. But it's useful to think of them as 3 things, because it's 3 in 1, Because the thing of one and unity and multiplicity is combined inconceivably in the Buddha realm, right? Remember we had many talks about cheap oneness versus expensive oneness, so I don't need to go into that again. And the truth body, so birth, death, and between into the 3 Buddha bodies. So birth is emanation body. Death is truth body, reality body. And between is Bardo. Is Sambhogakaya, beatific body. Some people call it enjoyment body. And the worst translation, somebody called it utility body. Which I think is kind of silly. Sambhoga. Bhoga means to consume. And Sambhoga in Kama Sutra means orgasm. Full enjoyment, so full consumption, And so it means real beatitude, blissful, total pleasure and total bliss. So, and also in the regular life cycle of day to day, when one becomes such a yogi, death becomes deep sleep, because deep sleep is where you merge with the clear light of the void, which is the definition of death. I think I explained that in the previous class. I won't go into it in detail today. I think I did. Where the reason death is connected to deepest sleep is that in deepest sleep, you're not lying in a dark state of unconsciousness, although a normal person thinks that's what they're doing. Turn off all the lights, and they shut off their sense organs, and they're just unconscious. But actually, without you realizing it, you slip below the immanence state. Remember the moonlit, sunlit, and darklit state? The darklit state is the immanence state. You slip below that, and you're in the clear light state, where your body, that's why you feel refreshed in the morning, because your body is filled with infinite energy, having been bathed as much as your cells will accept. You know, you've laid, you return to your Buddha nature in deep sleep, but not in the unconscious part of deep sleep, in a part of consciousness that you normally are unaware of. And that's the one like when you first die. In the Book of the Dead, remember, I guess we didn't read that fully, but in the Book of the Dead, remember it says, now you have died and you're in the between the state, and you have to identify and think that you yourself are this vast space, right? That's what you are. You mustn't feel you got lost, or you don't know who you are, what you are, and it's all some blank state. You must feel you are this vast space of transparency, clear light. And whatever your habit of being subject-object, the objective side of it is the mother, the all-good Buddha. The subjective side of it is the father, the blissful, total union with the all-good mother. So that's what you are. And you have to, and it will be hard for you to do that. You'll feel lost in that state, and you'll want quickly to run and find a seemingly separate body which can be yours. You can then control the space around you, fend off any kind of monsters, or grab more things to increase your size, and usual delusion that you're a separate entity, greed to expand your sense of separate entity by consuming more things, and aversion, hate, to push off anything that you think is trying to swallow you, right? So you slide, therefore, because those are your habits, you skip right across the state where you are everything and you are total bliss, and you are infinite energy, totally calm, but vibrant with bliss. And the only way you can really realize that is by melting totally into bliss. So therefore, you never realize it in subject-object way, which is why people who say, I realize emptiness, I realize clear light, actually are wrong. They are deluded. They realize some sort of threshold state where they felt they were like looking into a vast space, but they still had their subjectivity, so then they could possess the experience of that vast state. But you can't experience the experience of that vast state when you're really in it, because your experiencer is also it. So you slide right into it, actually. You merge in it, so you experience it only in a non-dualistic, non-subject-object way. So you give yourself to it, actually, rather than I have it, if you follow me. But they're encouraging people in the Book of the Dead, anyway, just to plant a seed, let's say, or maybe some exceptional one who has a deep sense of their own Buddha nature. Don't rush to jump up out of this feeling of vastness and infinite energy and quiescence and blissfulness. That's your father-mother union. That's the blissful melting into one another of subject and object, etc., etc. And it's a beautiful thing, actually. And Imagine Book of the Dead makes this a popular thing for the masses, and they sort of touch on it in the moment of dealing with bereavement and grief, and they reach it out by reading it to the ghost figure or the subtle body figure who's in the dream state or the bardo state and doesn't know where they are and what's going on, and they try to orient them to it. It's really very marvelous. It's a marvelous thing. And Padmasambhava wrote it, And Padmasambhava wrote it. He was an Indian, although he came from a part of India that's now northern Pakistan or Afghanistan, but because that was a huge kingdom in those days, which was really part of India. And just like Pakistan really is part of India. Silly, ideological division, dangerous ideological division today. And so this was from Indian esoteric science. But then in Tibet, after a certain stage, people got to where they could use that. And it became spread to them around 700 years after Padmasambhava, or 600 years after Padmasambhava wrote it. And why did it have to wait for 600 years to be revealed to the people en masse in Tibet? Because, you know, governments that are not really wanting people to be fully realistic, because when people become fully realistic, they become very individualistic, actually, in a relative way. And they therefore want to use their life to develop themselves evolutionarily. And therefore, they're not ready to march off and fight somebody. They're ready to resist dictators and tyrants and kings and warlords. And they want to go to the monastery. They want to develop their inner psychonaut, you know. So not living in denial of your death, as I think we've discussed before, but it's worthy to underline the point. Not being in denial of death, that death is right there in your face, actually. You know when they say, for example, hopefully everyone here will not experience death for at least 100 more years. Hopefully. Including me. So there'll be no more climate deniers by the time I do die, 100 years from now. And all of you too, hopefully. But, you know, they say like at the moment of death, your life flashes before your eyes in a split second, right? And the reason that is the case is because, realistically speaking, in the cosmic scheme of things, even 100 years, 150 years, is an Augensblick, you know. It's an eye blink. It's a very short time. And also because we waste so much time mentally wandering around and sleeping and eating and not really developing the inner soul gene, you know, the inner soul openness, the soul generosity, the soul love, the inner open-heartedness, open-mindedness that is our real evolutionary vehicle to the higher life. Not really developing that. The reason it can go so quick is that memorable quality time moments in our life are so few, actually. We spend all the time rushing anxiously to get this and that and pay our rent and do this and forward off that and worry about the bad dictator and the bad government and the bad Congress and actually we should a little worry about it. But anyway, we spend all our time doing that and really sort of being in a moment, not in a nihilistic moment, but a love moment where we want to live from the soul, where we want this moment to be something lasting and memorable for everyone. We want to be there for everyone. We want to, that kind of quality moment, right? There's so few. So although now it may seem a long time, the 100 years we all have left to live, when we get to the end, it'll seem like this. From this moment to then, we'll be like, bing. So actually, death is in our face, actually, even you live 100 years. And when you know that, it does not depress you, actually, at all. But it lights a fire under you to really open your mind, like what is this, you know? To really make the gift when you don't feel like it, to really rise above yourself when you feel like getting angry and frightened and freaked out and having a thing, and to try to be really positive from the depth all the time. You know, because if you want to, you know, since it's just a moment, it's in your face, when death comes, you want to be wide open. That's absolutely crucial to navigating it to the best of your ability. And of course, a Buddha doesn't have to navigate it because Buddha is dead while alive. He's like asleep while awake. He's like here but not here. Do you follow me? That's what Buddha consciousness is like. Buddha is aware at the clear light level while being totally aware at the differentiated level simultaneously. Super subtle, subtle, and coarse. All the planes are completely, you know, fully open, all the channels for an enlightened being. That's what an enlightened being is, by definition. Do you follow? Hello, Ji. Ni hao. Ni bu tai huai. Ni bu tai huai ma? Ni hao. Oh, hao. Okay, sorry. Ni hao. You know, my tones are terrible. It's really just so sorry. So, mi bu tai huai means you're not too bad, isn't it? Ni bu tai huai. You're not too bad. Yeah. But it's wrong tones, I'm sure, right? Ni bu tai huai. You know, what are the right tones? Ni bu tai huai. Ni bu Taiwan. So shy. Okay, you can teach me later. Okay, so this is what the creation stage is about. And the other lower tantras, the three, what are called lower, but they're really exalted, marvelous things. But they are like slowly, more gradually getting into where you, having realized some degree of emptiness, your imagination is somewhat liberated from being stuck on that pillar and that chair and that floor and your kneecap. And therefore, you're realizing your own role in constructing the world as you see it in the ordinary world. And then you begin to realize that therefore the inadequacy of the ordinary world and its painfulness and its imperfections and some ugliness and this and that way is partially of your own making, until your imagination is free to revisualize. And what you're revisualizing in the creation stage is first of all, you're revisualizing your own identity, not as your ordinary, vulnerable, freaked out identity, but your Buddha identity. You know, I'm Tara, I'm Buddha, I'm Manjushri or something. You're in that, in the mandala. So your imagination is shifting to where you're developing 4,200,000 leagues tall kind of attitude within this other special context, meditatively. So you feel a kind of self-confident creativity about things. And then you're visualizing the world, the physical plant of the world, as a crystal palace, gem, plasma, beautiful, fantastic, well air-conditioned, beautifully warm, vibrant, colored lights, fantastically, everything is just total beauty. You're seeing it like that. You're seeing through ugly concrete and pillars and whatever it is. And you're visualizing the time as a perfect time, the supreme exalted moment of perfect Buddhahood, which is present in all moments of time. And the era is perfect era, you know, where Buddha is manifest and all Buddhas are around you in every atom. And you're perceiving and you're visualizing imagining all beings around you as themselves just Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, entirely enlightened beings. And that's a really wonderful one, especially if it rubs off on your regular ordinary life a little bit. So if you've done that a little bit, it's very good for teachers. Because then teacher, instead of thinking, I'm smart and I know something and my students don't, you have this great thing that I like where you think, oh, my students are all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas already. And they kind of look like, oh, teacher, tell us something. Because they know that you're so self-involved that you only learn something when you talk about it yourself. And they're pretending to need to know it, so they make you think about it, and then they help you learn it. And they're already really enlightened, all of them. So they're already way beyond you. And they're giving you the opportunity to rehearse the thing in order to teach it, so you can learn it, you follow? Rather than, I'm the great teacher, and they have less knowledge than me. It's a marvelous thing, I think, for teachers. I know many colleagues who could use a visualization like that in their pompous classrooms, where they have to pretend they know everything, and they never say, I don't know, as an answer to a question, and whatever it is, you know, I'm sorry, but that's sort of the whole there, you know, I'm the big teacher, you know, like sort of routine, you know. So I love that one. But anyway, that's what you're visualizing yourself in the best of all possible worlds, perfect world. That's what mandala is. Mandala is a best of all possible worlds. A world, a universe that holds, protects the essence being bliss void indivisible, and all the forms that go with that, beauty, truth, goodness, everything, bliss, right? So that's that. Now, for example, I'm reading this to you all to give you an example of what it involves. When you actually get into it, once you have initiation, I presume none of you do have Guhya Samaja initiation. So I'm not saying this is now you should start practicing this. I want you just to know what it is. You may have other initiations, and they all are really good. And the great Tsongkhapa, and also many of the Sakyapas before him and the Kadampas before him, they felt that the Guhya Samaja, which I translate as esoteric community, some people call it the secret union, or they have words like that, which is not wrong, but I like esoteric community. Samaja can be a political party in modern Hindi, like the Brahmo Samaj was a Bengali political party seeking independence from Britain. So Samaj could be the Democratic Party. But it's a community, it should be a community, you know. And I like to use community for it. So then, see, once you receive that initiation, like say some monks in Gyuto, Gyume, Namgyal Tsang, or other places, or some Sakyapa monastery or Kagyu monastery. Kagyu also use Kriya Samaja. It's said to be the best of the father tantras amongst the unexcelled yoga tantras, and it's supposed to be one of the very best ones to learn about any of the unexcelled yoga tantras, any of the Maha, Anu, or Ati yogas, because it's very much highly explained. There's a root tantra, which is consisting of what are called Vajra words. Vajra means diamond, which means words that are sort of indivisible from clear light, issue from clear light, kind of are doorways into clear light, every word, something like that. So they call them Vajra words, diamond words, unbreakable words, which is told by Buddha himself as a Bhagavan, and what they call Bhagavan Mahavajradhara, great Vajradhara. And although he adopts in the process different forms of the 5, high Buddhas that you saw in some of the tables in the introductory readings in the Book of the Dead introduction, Vairochana, Ratnasambhava, Amitabha, Amoga, Siddhi, and Akshobhya, those 5 archetype Buddhas. And then the Buddha himself taught 5 commentarial tantras called Vyakya tantras, or explanatory tantras, himself. And then great psychonauts in the latter part, when Tantra became more overt in India from the 6th, 7th century, because it was safe to do so by that time in Indian culture, many great Siddha yogis wrote further commentaries. But then they have this funny thing where they say, but all of them are still scrambled and still codified, still encoded in a certain way, with all that root tantra, explanatory tantra, and commentaries. It's still codified, so one actually needs a living teacher to unscramble the codification. It's very decoded, but must be re-decoded. It's very funny, actually. Really interesting. And actually, you're not even supposed to talk about it, except His Holiness Dalai Lama asked everyone, and himself does, talk about it, so that people know what it is. Not by talking about it so people run off half-baked and think they can just do it automatically without proper preparation, proper prerequisites, and proper teaching. Really excellent, accurate teaching and initiation. Cannot, should not. But know what it is, to either be inspired about it, or if they think it's way beyond them, at least not to think it's some terrible, horrible thing, which unfortunately a lot of people have used Tantra to think that Tibet was corrupt, and even other Buddhists. Even in Japan, actually. Not even mentioning Tibet. Pure Land School, Zen School, and Lotus School, Nichiren and others, in Japan have always been like really derogatory towards Shingon School, which teaches Tantra. And they don't even have a known school in China teaching Tantra because they bypass them to some extent. But in Japan they did, they adopted it more. And Shingon was a very important school in Japan, it still is. But the other 3 don't like it. They act like, oh, that's something corrupt, oh, there's weird yogis, like hippies or something. There's an attitude about it. And therefore, this is an attitude in both Theravada Buddhism and regular Mahayana Buddhism in Asia against Tibetan Buddhism that Dalai Lama has somewhat undone now by traveling to all those countries, but is still an attitude. Lamaism, and some shamanistic Tibetan Buddhism, and somehow corrupt and like weird and everything, not acknowledging that actually it's Indian origin teaching, esoteric Vajrayana, Tantrayana, complete Indian origin, complete Buddha origin from our point of view, at least Indian origin even from Western historicists' point of view. Okay? So now it begins always, and these sadhanas always begin with a lineage of teachers through which the teaching has come down to one. And this is a really important aspect in the construction of Tibetan Buddhist culture, actually. And I'll explain what I mean by that. But just to give an example, and this is published, as I said, in Essential Tibetan Buddhism by me already, and I didn't get hit by a lightning bolt yet, but I might, but I didn't yet. So I don't feel too scared to show it to you. May the glorious, precious root mentor sit in the lotus of my heart and sustain me with his great kindness. May he grant attainments of body, speech, and mind. So that's the first one. So that's the thing about the living teacher, which I like to call mentor rather than guru or even lama, or master. I don't want to call it master. Mentor, because that means like a model, as well as a teacher. And he represents all of the lineage in a way, because he's the last member who delivers it to me. Then in this case, the seventh Dalai Lama who wrote this particular sadhana, he says, I invoke the glorious Losang Dakpa. That's Tsongkhapa, because that was his founder in the recent New Karmapa school, or Gandemba school originally, and then came to be known as Gelugpa, who lovingly teaches just as he sees the complete essence of the path of all Sutra and Tantra, who holds the complete holy Dharma of the victor. And then again, back from that, I invoke the feet of the holy mentor, supreme guide, leading beings to liberation, seeing this life impermanent as a bubble, and samsara coreless like a plantain tree. I invoke the feet of the omniscient one, perfect fruit of enlightenment's evergreen tree, grown on the ground of equanimity, from compassion's seeds watered by the rain of love. That's Shakyamuni Buddha, who all Tibetan Buddhists, all Mahayana, Indian Mahayana Buddhists originally considered the founder of Tantra, and the first teacher of Tantra was Shakyamuni. I invoke the effortless servant of others in ordinary form for the sake of the less intelligent. That's the Buddhist teacher, actually, the Kalyana Mitra, the virtuous friend, servant of others. Notice, the teacher is the servant, not the master. In ordinary form for the sake of the less intelligent, yet complete with the mandala of 32 deities, the 5 families with the 4 consorts, and so on. Nowadays I use clans, but now that we're having a few neo-Nazis running around, I think I might switch back to families. The reason I switch from families to clans in my current translations of these things is because these are extended families, not nuclear families. They're cousins and uncles, a lot of things, and almost like a tribe or something, the 5 ones. But my family seems more nice and gentle to us. I think I might go back to it. Then I invoke the omnipresent Lord, omnipresent Lord Vajradhara, who achieves being's aims with limitless incarnations, with the vow of the inseparable Vajra union, base of the whole mandala, residence and environment. And the Vajra union is another name for Buddhahood. Nowadays I won't edit what I can't help myself. And now this is what is important. I was asked by the editor, because this is not a practice publication, it's a what is this publication in my Central Tibetan Buddhism. So each one of these is a full verse. So I invoke the feet of Lota Rinchen, I invoke the feet of Savior Nagarjuna, I invoke the feet of Matangipa. And each one of them has their own verse, and there's a bunch more in between before you get to Tilopa, Sriñana, and then you get to Narapa. And then after Narapa you get to Marpa. So this is totally, Marpa is totally in this lineage. And each one has their own verse, and you see each one, and then many Tibetans, you see these, each one of these has their own verse. You see, up to Tsongkhapa. These were all the predecessors from Marpa to Tsongkhapa. And then Sangyongwa, then after Tsongkhapa up to this sky, all the way up to here, it goes. And Kelsang Gyatso, who is the 7th Dalai Lama, actually. And then people added a little more, a few other Dalai Lamas here, a few Pension Lamas. Somebody threw in who later edited it, but never mind. Now my point about this, then, and this is always at the beginning of every sadhana, something like this. In different traditions, it will be a different list of people. Some of them will combine, which proves that Tibetans are not sectarian, because they all are saluting the same ancestors. But what this is making a Dharma ancestor as your most important ancestor. And this resulted over many centuries in a very fascinating thing about Tibetan Buddhist culture, which was definitely not the case in pre-Buddhist culture. And that is that the sort of feeling you have about ancestors is transvalued, it's revalued into spiritual ancestry. And this is a very key thing. If you go back going back to the life of Milarepa, some psychiatrist pointed this out who wrote an interesting analysis of the life of Milarepa. A very wonderful man who later was a dean at Emory College. I won't digress, but called The Tibetan Symbolic World. A wonderful book, and I'm not remembering the author's name right now, although he's a friend of mine. But in that, he has a chapter on Milarepa. And as a sort of thematic work, Milarepa, of course, it's a memoir of a person, as told to a disciple. But a central theme in it is that the bloodlines, the family bloodlines of the Marpa clan and the Milarepa clan, which are two separate families, each one of them kind of ends in non-fruitful disaster. In other words, Milarepa's clan, he murders members of them because they oppressed him and his mother and deprived them of their patrimony. And Marpa's son doesn't come to a good end because he doesn't listen to Dakinis and he wants to make him his heir, and he makes him a teacher's pet, and he gives him teachings that he can't manage, and he dies prematurely. So there's if the bloodline comes here and this other bloodline, both are broken, the two clan bloodlines. But the spiritual line, which includes Indians, Tilopa, Marpa, Shakyamuni, Vajradhara, and Nagarjuna, and all kinds of people before Marpa in Tibet, to Milarepa. And then from Milarepa to Gampopa and the Karmapas and the Jigungpas and all of the many Karmapa, Kagyupa schools. Karmapa is only one of them, not all of them are Karmapa. And very prolific. So embedded in that very, very popular Tibetan work, one of the most popular biographies, spiritual biographies in the Tibetan literature, is this idea that the bloodline, samsaric bloodline, is not fruitful. But the spiritual bloodline, seed line, is fruitful. So the soul ancestor is important. And this underlies the theory of karma. Why the biological theory of karma was so important in Asia, and why Asian people were more civilized than Western people. Because of that. Although some monastics, I think, in the West maybe achieved a similar thing. Thinking of themselves as descended from the Christ or from the holy ancient, saints, rather than from their parents, Monks kind of get into that. But is that Tibetans, uniquely among Asian people, have almost no ancestor worship. If you know something about Chinese culture, the ritual of keeping all the ashes and then the ancestral temple and offering a cookie and tea and cookies to your ancestors is a huge thing. And similarly in India, the manes, the Brahmin ancestors, is an enormous thing. Also Korea and Japan, huge thing about all the Zen temples in Japan are big funerary businesses. They actually survive as funeral businesses. People don't realize that. Not like Western, where people are out there macho staring at the wall. Zen used to be like that. And then there's a few spots where they're really trying to do it. But most of the Zen temples belong to some guy who smokes Marlboros, drives a BMW, is a layman, and it's a family owner. He owns it like a family inherited thing. And their main business is performing funerals. And they have big, magnificent, actually marvelous cemeteries. And even one Zen master I knew who was very famous in the West, and people thought, oh, he must be really far out. He proudly took me into his cemetery and showed me the tombstone of his cat, his favorite cat. But never mind that. So my point is that this came from this kind of, esoteric thing, where and the core people who send out the morphic resonance, the vibe into the popular culture, they shift, and the karma theory is like that. Because Grandpa, I'm not going to live to give Grandpa cookies. Why? Grandpa might be you. Already reborn, and maybe I'm an ignorant person I can't recognize. Grandpa might be one of my own children. Or he might be some neighbor in the street, or he might be a stranger, or he might be somebody in the enemy nation. Karma erodes the blood egotism, which underlies tribalism, nationalism, which we notice is still alive and well on this planet, don't we? Just now we're particularly poignantly reminded of how people can be mobilized into racist, tribalist thing because our blood is better than somebody else's, which is ridiculous, actually. but it's still alive in people who haven't cultivated it. And you go in Massachusetts somewhere, and there's some waspy family, you go in there, you go and you put your coat in the cold weather, put your coat, hang it up in there, and you take off your galoshes, whatever, leave your umbrella, and in that front hall, a bunch of weirded, bearded people. Some old funky guy, maybe it was a whaling captain, some waspy guy, killed a lot of whales, sitting there, and some poor wife looking like she just got whipped twice that day, standing next to her. Oh, that's my ancestor, you know. It's like a big deal. It's not so formal like in China, but it's a big racist thing, actually. It's the root of the racist thing is how intense you are about your own ancestors. You know, Hatfields and McCoys. Grandpa McCoy got killed by that Hatfield. I'm going to kill him forever. And there's this tribalism. You can go down the line. Tribalism, racism, tribalism, you know, ancestorism, clanism, you know, nationalism. Right? The word nation comes from, you know, native comes from something natura, which means to be born. You know, you're a native, you're born somewhere. You know? Nationalism. Even the word nation comes from the word for birth. So that's where you are like, oh, and you can hear some people, we have to make rituals to our ancestors. They're so important, our ancestors. But you know, we might have been Tibetans in previous life. We might have been from like Zambezi, Zimbabwe in previous time. You know, we might be Chinese in previous life. We might be Japanese. We might be whatever, Eskimo. So why are we fussing about some white wasp weirdo someplace, and vice versa, or some black weirdo? Some black guy might have been a Korean. So how come they're fussing about some tribal mugga up there in Nigeria? Do you follow me? The karma theory, as a biological theory, slipped out, and it eroded people's racism in Asia, making them less inclined to demonize, and you know what the anthropologists call, what wars depend on, really genocidal wars depend on, a population being brainwashed into thinking that the enemy is less than human, subhuman species. It's called pseudo-speciation. You make another species out of another nation. You know, and all, you know, derogatory statements like, you know, Nips and Japs and Bosch and Krauts and whatever, you know, ragheads, you know, all this kind of thing is all into that. And it all plays on those kind of ignorant self-definitions of my blood is different from your blood, which is total BS. There is no such thing. There's no Jewish blood, there's no wasp blood, there's no black blood, there's no Chinese blood. And actually, you know, some weird waspy guy in Boston and some Chinese guy from Shanghai, they're genetically closer. Of course, they're both close to chimpanzees, but they're genetically closer than people in 2 African villages, 20 miles apart, are more different. If you ask DNA people, they'll tell you that. So what is this big thing about my ancestors? And in a way, it takes long centuries and generations for this to erode immunize people against demagogic, warlordish demonizing of what they want their soldiers to think of are as non-human people who should be go off and slaughter. Right? Do you get it? You know, if we had karma theory operating in the alt-right, I think it would have made a difference. Not as a fatalistic Asian Buddhist or Hindu weird thing. That would make it, they'd all freak run to some church or something and cross themselves, whatever. But if it was if it was known to be an explanation of biology, where your mind connects to your soul, and your mind goes from body to body and jumps from race to race, nation to nation, gender to gender, it also undercuts misogyny. And what would be the opposite of misogyny? When you don't like men, what would that be? I think it's such a rare thing because women are held so lowly. But what is it when women think men are lowly? What would that call? Not androgyny? Well, I don't know what it would be called, but there should be. We'll have to develop a word for that. If the women get strong enough someday and realize what a bunch of turkeys the men are, then we have to have a word about it. You shouldn't overdo it. like misogyny, you know. Okay, so that's a digression, but that's very, very important. Because karma theory, as taken as a scientific biological theory, not as a mystical fate or any such thing, but a biological theory, is part of developing the transcendent renunciation that then makes it possible to go in these deep unconscious areas. That is what the tantric practice involves going into. So it's already eroded unconscious, the unconscious roots of racism, sexism, and all this kind of thing, right? You get it? It's very important. In the mandala, look at that, as far as color business, you're sitting in the same mandala with people who are black, green, red, white, yellow, and blue. Okay? And they're all totally equal, but they have different virtues, actually. And this is one thing I particularly like about Kalachakra. Kalachakra has a front black face. He has a right red face. He has a left white face. He has a back yellow face. So you have the whites, the orientals, the reds, and the blacks. And all four of them are really equal. But they mean other things in that. But in a way, the Kalachakra, therefore, on a subtle level, sort of symbolizes the unity. The different limbs are also different colors, and they have different aptitudes and things, and they fit together though in one body, which I think is something having to do with the legend of Kalachakra, where this world as it is, long before the advent of Maitreya, hundreds of thousands of years before the advent of Maitreya, within a few centuries from now, which I never agreed to. I always have to, next week. I want Shambhala next week, but maybe it's a few elections away. I don't know, but I want it sooner. But, that we will get past these terrible, forms of egocentrism, of root egotism and egocentrism, root ignorance. They're just elaborations on all of them are sexism, racism. They're all egocentrism blown up into this and that level. Okay, so then it ends that. So that is. When you enter, already as a monk, you've entered into a fellowship and a brotherhood and sisterhood and a family feeling about all beings, right? Already to develop the Bodhisattva vow, you see all beings as your mother. That includes the beings of all races, genders, colors, everything. And actually, I meant to read today, I might do it next time, from the first chapter of the Guhya Samaja, which I haven't keyed up here, so I probably won't get to it tonight. But I meant to read where, Vairochana, all the Buddhas there, Vairochana emerges, and then they all turn into females to please him, and then he turns into female. And then, when you do that, you even meditating yourself as either male or female, or both male and female. It's a lot cheaper than a trans operation to shift identity in the subtle plane, where you really, or like remember Shariputra had a magical operation just to show him not to be so male chauvinist, remember? In the Vimalakirti, where the Prajnaparamita goddess for a moment turned him into her, right, and her into herself into him. Said, "How come you're a woman?" And it means he really felt he was a woman, and he had a little castration complex anxiety, and a little thing about his chest, like it felt a little different for a moment. He was, his voice, like, "Oh, what happened to me?" But that's a visceral way, and you do that in this kind of meditations. You go to your deep levels of self-modeling. These things interfere with and get involved with. That's why it's esoteric. Okay? So I acknowledge and repent, and then they throw in a little virtue stuff, and they pretty much end with the ninth. I think Losang Jambal is maybe the 8th Dalai Lama. I think they stop there, and then they general things, compassion, true master, blah blah blah, and then whoa, here we go. In a split second, I myself become the blue-black fury Vajra. That's that deity in the center of the Guhya Samaja Mandala, of the esoteric community Mandala, with 3 faces, black, white, and red. And the white one symbolizes the luminance state. The red one symbolizes the radiance state, in the appearance, spread of appearance, whatever it is. Silly translation. and immanent state, but you will have read maybe the other translations. But luminance, radiance, and immanence, clockwise going around. Immanence is that dark face, the dark state. So that means, what that means is, since that the esoteric community Buddha is, Akshobhya Vajra, his name, is all made of clear light, and it's conscious clear light, shapes his own body via being aware of the infinite energy of the clear light of the void, out of the bliss of the clear, of indivisibility of clear light of the void, and is able to do differentiated things, artistic things with that infinite energy. And it shows that that being is also conscious at the immanence state, and luminance, front phase is immanent state, and radiant state and luminance state, all three, and that's particularly important because the esoteric community is a father tantra among the unexcelled yoga tantras. There's something called father tantra and mother tantra. The reason they're called father tantra is that the father-mother union at the very ultimate level is the union of the magic body made of bliss and the clear light of the void. Also bliss, but also wisdom. So it's bliss, wisdom, indivisible, father-mother union. So therefore, Father Tantra is tantras that are, all of them are non-dual, according to most of the commentators. There are some Tibetan lamas who have a thing, and there's a third category, non-dual. But Tsongkhapa doesn't like that. He says they're all non-dual, because all of them develop both. You have to develop magic body and clear light together. You can't, and Yuganata, the ultimate state of communion, which is the goal of the perfection stage, which I'll come to next slide, is a union of both. So you can't have one that's just only magic body or one that's just only clear light. They're all the union of magic body and clear light. But one emphasizes the technique of creating magic body. And that's why Guhya Samaja has black, white, and red faces. And I'm not sure, I still can't be sure why. He has the white face on this side. And maybe because it starts on the right and goes around to the front. And that then indicates what's called the descending order, coming out of the coarse reality, going to the clear light. And it's the black face that stays most focused on clear light. And then to unwind it, you have to go black, red, and white. So you have to go backwards. It doesn't fit with the three channels because the right channel is red and the left channel is white. So, it's going down to the clear light, coming back into the coarse reality. Sort of map, the way the map is drawn. And when you have those three faces, it means your awareness accompanies the super subtle. Your awareness is, you are clear light of the void, and your awareness accompanies all the mental states of the subtle, because they are your faces, right? Immanence, radiance, and luminance. And then that's the boundary between where you then begin to embed into a coarse embodiment. If you were going to be reborn normally, or if you were going to do a nirmanakaya, where you were going to look like an ordinary person in order to interact, or something like an ordinary person to interact with other ordinary persons. But magic body practice is where you do a kind of super bardo dream body yoga, where you go around the universe in the form of a body of pure light. So you never go up with the four harsh elements, You are also conscious of all those levels, but you don't go and embed yourself in atoms, coarse atoms of wind, fire, water, and earth, of movement, of heat, of cohesiveness, and solidity. You don't. Instead, you work in the dream level. You make a body there out of luminance, radiance, and immanence. And then out of that, you shape a body that goes in other worlds. Because what is it? It isn't that you're creating all these things. We already are all these things. Even Western science would agree with us. Like I said in other earlier sessions, I think, if you take any one of us and throw us into one of those cyclotrons, in case we were some kind of trash product, but we took our whole body and mind and threw it in there, just the body even, and say, luckily we might have passed away, but right away, fresh and warm, they threw our body in there, then the atoms in the body that made flesh, bone, lymph, neural patterns, they're like dissolved out. They're like molecules when they are looked at by a machine, in a cloud chamber, star chamber, what do they call it? Then those molecules are atoms. Then the atoms are subatomic particles. Then subatomic particles finally disappear when they reach the speed of light. And they become light. So that means if you go to what we're really constituted of, the thing where we finally elude any form of pinning ourselves down like a material object, we have bodies of light. We already have. It's just we're not conscious of ourselves as bodies of light. We think we have a flash of light here and there in this and that experience. But actually, we are bodies of light already. We're all made of light. Somehow light gets all slowed down by the wetware. Right? But we're all bodies of light, because if you take any atom out of our body and go look at its parts, it ends up as light and dissolves in spooky action and distance and wave particle and clear light, actually. So that's what we are made of, if you will. Where mind and matter are not two different things. I hope he listened. My dearly beloved Deepak, who's been valiantly and mightily struggling with the materialist scientists to get them to recognize the reality of mind in nature. The latest of a long line of people who have done that, for which I deeply admire him. And then he's into this thing, it's all consciousness, There's a little bit Vedanta thing like Brahma, God consciousness, But I said, look, if you do idealistic or mentalistic reductionism, and you say that ultimately it's all consciousness, in a way, that will just confirm the rigidity of the materialists and their thing that it's all matter. Because then now they have solid matter and energy matter as the same matter. So they'll say it's all matter. And they're stuck in materialistic reductionism. And then they'll see you as stuck in mentalistic reductionism. So you can easily say, emphasizing the mental side to them, that when you really get down to where it's all some one thing, it's meaningless to say it's either all matter or all consciousness. Why? Because once it's all consciousness, then there's nothing other than consciousness for it to be conscious of, and therefore what we think of as consciousness, which is dualistic, conscious subject and object, there's no object anymore. So there's no point calling it all consciousness. You're taking a term from the dualistic subject-object thing. It's like saying, they say it's all objectivity, and then they say, oh, well, you're a fanatic too, you're saying it's all subjectivity. Meanwhile, when you get to the complete level anywhere, you meet, because words like subjectivity and objectivity have no meaning in non-duality. Therefore, you can use mentalistic reductionism when it's useful to empower your soul and your mind and to be responsible for it. And you can use materialistic reductionism when you want to, arrange the flowers more nicely. Work on the infrastructure. Okay, in the coarse reality level. You can use that too. No problem. As long as you don't become dogmatic and fanatic about it. And then you're entrapped in an ideology like the materialists are. And I could tell it clicked. So you expect another Deepak book. He writes them really quickly. Another Deepak book on non-duality, I hope. Anyway. So anyway, here I myself become the blue-black fury Vajra. And here fury, see, there's pure energy. But that's the energy of intelligence. And it's called fury because to a Buddha, fury is like dissolving all kinds of seeming intrinsic realities, intrinsic objectivities, intrinsic subjectivities, intrinsic identities. It just tears them all apart, which is what intelligence does. It analyzes things to see what they're made of, how they work, what causes them, and where is there a place where something is not caused, or is there such a place, Which is not, and is there a nothing that's beyond all of that? And real intelligence will drill right through some image of nothing, too. And it'll realize emptiness relativity. It did, and it has in every enlightened being since Buddha, and before that, since previous Buddhas. It does not just Buddhists either. So that's why it's called Fury Vajra. The fury energy becomes ultimate reality, perfection, wisdom, which is associated with the blue-black color of the central deity, Akshobhya Vajra, in the Kriya Samaja Mandala. Most of the unexcelled Yoga Tantra central deities have that black color, usually. Because the ultimate reality, perfection, means that ultimate reality is clear light, indivisible from everything. Everything coarse and subtle on every level. Mind and matter, including everything. Both one and many. Incorporating all of it. Being all of it, actually. Right? So that's why it's called Fury Vajra. And it's like, they say that he has a little bit like fangs. With some other, I can go back to that picture of him. And what he's doing with those incisors, there. What he's doing with those incisors, that's him. That's like Shobhya. See, the white face, the luminance face, the red face is the radiance face, and this blue-black, see, dark blue, blue-black sapphire face is the immanence face. Remember the 3 levels of subtle mind. And he's conscious on those 3 levels. And limbs are black. And she's the same color, actually. The reason she looks like that is she's smeared with cemetery ashes. As he is too, but somehow her cemetery ashes are a little more whitish. I don't know why. So it makes her look a lighter blue color like that. And the 6 arms, each of them, if you note, he has 2 arms. He has a vajra and a bell in the 2 hands that are crossed behind her back. And the vajra symbolizes compassion, and the bell symbolizes wisdom. And both of them symbolize Akshobhya Buddha, Vajradhara. And then he has, in this one, he has I think it's a sword. He has, and that's symbol of Amoga Siddhi. And he then has, in his hand he has, a lotus, that's a symbol of Amitabha. And then he has a wheel, and that's a symbol of Vairochana. So Amitabha is the Buddha of the individuating wisdom, which is the transmutation of lust. And the wheel is the symbol of the ignorance, of the mirror wisdom, mirror-like wisdom, and that is the transmutation of delusion or ignorance. And in this hand he has a sword, which is the symbol in the north of Amoga Siddhi, which is jealousy transmuted into the miracle-working wisdom. And he has here a jewel, which is Ratnasambhava, in the south, which is symbol of the wisdom of equanimity, which is transmutation of the poison of pride/miserliness, since those 2 go together, arrogance and miserliness. Wrong kind of pride. But of course, so when you say, so that's what he looks like, and he is, you can either be both, him and with the female together, you can be both male and female. She also has the 3 faces and 6 arms, with the same symbols, and they're in union, symbolizing that they're in the bliss, the melted bliss of oneness with clear light and everything else. Also separation. So they're 2 in 1, but they're still 2. That's a key point. It's called Yuganada, which I call communion, the highest state from Tantra. And with 3 faces, black, white, and red. 6 arms holding vajra, wheel, and lotus in the right. And bell, jewel, and sword in the left. Embraced by texture vajra, I would translate this nowadays. It's an older translation. The touch object, in other words, but touch is all right. But texture vajra, similar to myself. We are both adorned with that is to say, all textures are a female Buddha, that means. We are both adorned with the 8 jeweled ornaments, our shoulders draped with heavenly shawls, our waists covered with silken robes. So that's so right away, instantaneous self-creation. You are that, and you have the pride of, I am that. You follow me? Yourself, and your mind shifts into feeling that's your body. And you could either be the male part of it, if your partner was equally trained as you with all the prerequisites, with the knowledge, with the initiation, and she was, however, female, so she wanted to be the female one. You could also be 2 people, or you could be 1 person who are both. And that 1 person could be either a female yogini or a male yogi, it doesn't matter. But they'd be both together. If you can imagine yourself being 2 beings in union, with 2 different kinds of bodies. You're like, that's a kind of weird creature. It's quite interesting. And then there's some more things. So anyway, that's that. And then, there's this thing about, that's a marvelous thing, but we don't need to do that. And then you make offerings, everything. Everything in the world becomes an offering. Then you offer the whole universe. to the thing. So you are both that, and you're also yourself as a practitioner, and everything is voidness. You know, everything is seen as voidness, and that's where you offer idam guru ratna mandala kam niryatyame. So here's where you offer, through offering to your guru, not just $100 or like a thing, everything, the whole planet. You give away the whole planet, the solar system, the galaxy, the universe, because these are all preliminaries actually. Then here you have a refuge, and in this refuge there's Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Sugata means Buddha, Dharma means Dharma, so Sangha means Sangha, so you still have same three jewels you have in Theravada and Mahayana. And now you actually get to the creation state, but then these are some prayers. It's the Holy Spirit of Enlightenment, that's the Bodhisattva mind. And then you do a purification thing, which is the Vajrasattva thing. I'm not going to go into detail about it. You have the famous 100, you'll make offerings to Vajrasattva. It's a little complicated, but I'm not going to do it tonight. And then you, what happened? Why does it jump to Akshobhya? Oh, crying by Akshobhya. Yeah, that's, I don't know why it's like that. And this is the 100-syllable mantra, which is very, very good. But you cite that when you imagine a male-female Vajrasattva on your head, white, in union, and they're where they meet, the two organs meet, sort of the focal point of the bliss that radiates throughout their entire bodies, every nerve in their whole body. Sort of that bliss sort of drips down your central channel, fills your nervous system as you recite this thing. It's a marvelous thing, actually. Om Bodhisattva Samaya. It's a kind of primal scene yoga, actually. As my colleague once at Amherst almost had a fit about it. Did I tell you that story? He had a total fit. He's a historian, and we were doing a course in college about, his specialty was 1830s, the great revival movement of the 1830s, you know, like everyone was being born again in New York State, all over the place. And and here's where you visualize the guru as bodies being made of all kinds of Buddhas. But I'm practicing leaving that. And more refuge, goes on and on and on and on. But I want to come to where it's the real. But these are all, in a way, preliminaries. Then this is the building of the mandala. And then this is where it really kind of begins. There being no things, there is no meditator, nothing to meditate upon, and no meditation. Since things are without reality, meditation is not to be perceived. Since all animate and inanimate things are ultimately without reality, meaning intrinsic reality, of course, they have the nature of emptiness, signlessness, and wishlessness, which are called the three doors of liberation, wherein meditation and meditator are not perceived. From the actuality of emptiness in a split second, in the center of the complete Vajra ground, replete with blah, blah, blah. Now he starts to build the mandala universe. When you practice this, you start to build that. And that verse, these verses here, are where whatever you understood previously of selflessness or emptiness, you bring forth in your mind. And there's a very important point. They say, never think, when in the shorter sadhanas, they just simply say, let all become emptiness. Everything becomes emptiness, they say. Shunyata bhavatu. But sarva shunya bhavatu, something like that. But when they say that, the commentators say, don't think of it as a black, dark space, like, where you might imagine out in empty space where the sun can't be seen, maybe a little starlight, but it's all dark. Because actually clear light is this infinite energy that underlies that dark, actually, in the Buddhist cosmology. And it is not dark, and it's not bright light either. It's this transparency, twilight light, where there's no shadow, because everything is transparent. So it's a gray, pre-dawn twilight light. And that's the real nature of emptiness. And there's that infinite energy in it. So it's a zone, it's where everything is kind of seen as reduced to, but it's not really reduced to, because that same clear light is shaped into all the differentiated things. So you don't destroy them when you see that. But you destroy thinking that they are something apart from that. In that sense, they have no reality apart from this. But within this, or as this, they do have a reality, a relative reality. Because the emptiness, clear light of, have to keep emphasizing, clear light of the void is a way of expressing the infinite energy that shapes duality in non-duality. Emptiness is relativity. It's not underlying it, it's not beyond it, it's not outside it. You can seem to go outside of it, but actually you never can go outside of it because it is everything. It's infinite everything, right? So when you think there's no meditator, there are no things, all these critical or negational language, there's no reality, don't think of a dark black space, because this will reinforce in your mind a nihilistic attitude. You know, that there's somewhere where causality doesn't apply. But there's nowhere where causality doesn't apply, actually. In fact, causality, you know, the uncreated, the uncaused, the transcendent, the luminous, the empty, the void, is the whole plane of causality, if you follow me, which is relativity. But there are many, then once that's the case, causality is somewhat magical or illusory, which means there's no one description of causality that dominates, that seizes what's going on. It's inconceivable. And that's where ability of miracle comes in. Someone who really, that's why Buddhas can do miracles. Because, like he did in the Vimalakirti, and Vimalakirti did them. And even that's why they can travel between universes. They don't need a transporter room. And I'm so frustrated I can't attain this. I hate buying plane tickets and being penalized when I change my return ticket by these like greedy airlines. You would just beam out. I could be in San Francisco with my friends and then come back for tea. Go see the Dalai Lama, ask him a question, and then zap back, bam. Such bodhisattvas can do that. Inconceivable liberation bodhisattva can do that, according to them. And theoretically, I can't say no, although if I saw one of them do it, I'd flip out. Because I'm like Carlos Castaneda. Remember poor Carlos Castaneda? When Don Juan and Don Genaro would show him a few little miraculous things, like jumping off a cliff and flying around like a ball of luminous fibers, which is just the subtle body, you know, the channels of the subtle body, and the energies in the subtle body, and the drops and the movement of the energies within it. And but anyway, when he showed him that, he would vomit and freak out because his materialistic sense of what was real and what was possible would be so shaken. He would like have a disorientation fit and vomit. I don't know if you remember that, but he was constantly vomiting. Poor Don Juan must have been disgusted having to clean up that mess. So the point is, when you think, if in case any of you do any kind of sadhana, or any of you at home, of any kind, when you say, let all be emptiness, which some of the very short ones will say, not a long verse like this, then never think of it as a dark thing. Think of it as that twilight thing of infinite potential, of infinite mutability, of infinite transportability, at the non-changeable, the uncreated, the nirvanic plane of bliss, clear light, is all of the changing things, rather than is beyond them or outside of them, etc., etc. That's the non-duality corrective. And what that then means is that all that is of concern to you is compassion, love. Your channeling of being aware of this infinite energy is who needs some energy, because they're freaking out. In what form do they need it? And who can absorb it in which way? So it has to be artistically presented and so forth. It can't just be like dumped on people. Okay? So we only have a little bit. So any question? So, from the actuality in a split second, just to say, in a split second, in the center of the complete Vajra ground with Peter fence, tent, canopy, and fire mountain, there's a white triangular reality source standing upright with an expansive top and tapered base. So there's a giant triangle upside down. I said, oh, it's beautiful. It's a cosmogony. It's like a Genesis cosmogony, which you use your creative imagination to do. You have wind, which is pure energy, water, fire, water, earth, and then you build on that a mountain and a building, and etc. It's really quite beautiful. The palace itself, the walls have, and just this part, I could go into it, but I'm not going to do that. So actually earth, water, fire, wind become Buddha, female Buddhas. Earth is Lochana, water is Mamaki, fire is Pandaravasini, wind is Samayatara. So that's Tara. Just the breeze blowing on your face. There's nothing that isn't beautiful, in other words. So when you become able to really do this, which you build up bit by bit, baby steps. Any questions? I'm not going to read further tonight in this. We'll come back to it on the 30th, where we'll look at perfection stage. Of the two, did you put both documents up, 8 and 9?
Yes.
No, just 8?
Yes, both.
Both, okay, good. So you can prepare for that by reading the 5 stages of Nagarjuna, excerpts from the 5 stages of Nagarjuna, which are the 5 stages of the perfection stage. I mean, you can read through the sadhana, but your mind will be kind of blown. It seems hard to imagine, but you can read it. Where you would then have all the Buddhas become parts of your body. Then you dissolve, you go through a death process of melting, where all the Buddhas melt, and you arise again. It's really quite a marvelous sequence. And basically all of it is involved in turning death into the body of truth, or the body of reality, turning the between state into the body of beatitude, and turning the birth state into the body of ordinary, into the body of emanation. So that there's no more in that mandala realm. Even the buildings are Buddha body, and all the beings are really one being on the truth body level, but they also are separate on the Sambhoga body level, on the beatific and emanation body levels. Each one has their own enjoyment of being one with the other, in other words. That continues. It's just so neat. And but that's really what it is. Replacing the pride of ordinariness of your perceptions, sense perceptions, and your self-identifications, your concepts about what you are and what the world is, with the extraordinary ones, and developing what's called divine pride, Buddha confidence, that everything is this Buddha, it is the Buddha's body, the whole world, in a very systematic and beautiful manner. It's really, it's artistic. It's learning ahead of time the art of life itself, making life itself an art form, because the Buddha's body itself is an art form. It transmits something subliminally to people. The actual body does in itself. It isn't like it's the body, and then in the body I go around and teach something. And then even the world becomes a mandala, and it transmits something. So the environment, the chairs teach the people. The pillars teach the people. The walls, the ceiling, the floor teaches the people. The wind blowing by them teaches them. It's just outstanding. Something that human beings develop. And I do believe the Kabbalah people, the Sufis, the Shaivite Tantras, Vaishnava Tantrikas, the Taoists, they all got into this they all had versions of this in their, and the great Christian monastics, Hildegard of Bingen, Teresa of Avila, they had their own mansions of the mansion of the Lord, and then the bridegroom, Jesus appeared to Teresa as the bridegroom, and so forth. They all had this. You don't have to be Buddhist to use this, to find this ability to perceive the universe's beauty that is in everybody's heart, everybody's subtle mind and super subtle mind, and then everybody's soul. It's all there. The Buddha nature means the Buddha womb, the Buddha essence, the clear light of the void is in everybody already. Every time we die, we experience it. When we have orgasm, we have a taste of it. When we sometimes we faint, we have like a blissful dream. That's central channel is having some energy in it, some awareness goes into the center of the nervous system. And that's a fact. And it doesn't involve Buddhism. So therefore, you read in the Panchakrama that the adept, to them, Vishnu, Shiva, Vajradhara, it's all the same, there's no problem. They don't bother with that. They don't worry about it. Yes, question?
It's just about sources. Where did you
Sure.
say the 5 perfection stages?
I'm sorry?
Describe, where can we get that description of the 5 perfection stages? Did you say Nagarjuna?
The 5 stages?
Yes.
It's in number
the
9,
perfection
the
stage?
document she put up
Oh,
from my translation. She put up on the...
Put up where?
I mean, it's also in the Essential Tibetan Buddhism book, chapter 9. I think you have that book. You're a veteran. You're a graduate student.
If you need the reading, talk to me after.
And so it is also there, but you know, we made it available to people online, and I don't know if they can reach that or how they do, but it's there too, just to see what it is. I'm not urging it. I have no ability to give initiations, etc., etc. And you're not supposed to really do it until you have initiation. And also, you're not really capable of it, because what the initiation does from a really true, valid teacher who is properly trained it, practiced in it themselves, learned about it themselves, is that they have in their own brain and mind a kind of hologram of the whole different universe. And so subtly, the morphic resonance of that hologram plants itself in one's own brain, but it doesn't overtake one's brain, but it sort of, the potential presence, it sort of creates like a template in the person who receives that, who is capable of really, who has the flexibility to really receive that, who isn't sort of in a rigid, like, I have my world and I'm in New York, I'm 15th Street, and it's like New York and I'm an American and I'm like whatever I am, you know. And I have this body and 2 arms and forget about it. You know, that person can't receive that template, you know, actually, really. So there has to be loosened up our habitual, ordinary template by emptiness realization, which does loosen it up automatically. And, right? So that's it. What was your question?
Yeah, my question is, someone has told me that Tantra is the fast track to Buddhahood in this lifetime. Is that correct? How do you...
Yes, it could be. It could be. In other words, the exceptional person who, but you know, unfortunately, usually it's when, in some context where they received this kind of thing earlier in their youth, actually. And they, for instance, in the Tibetan monastic thing, a lot of the people don't really put their full energy into studying this. They get the initiations preliminarily and they recite things, but they don't really get into it until their late 30s because they have so much philosophical things to do, you know, and memorize. So they're kind of all worn out in their mid-40s or early 40s, late 30s before they really get into it, which is kind of an obstacle for some of them, some of the schools, you could say. And because, of course, the exoteric things have all these in seed form, but not so explicated, you know, technical. So the exceptional one, like a Milarepa or something, who does it all in one life, they have to have the luck of getting it fairly young, and then they have to really drop out and only do that, usually. Might be the case of someone who had done a lot already in previous life, had an incredible affinity, and sort of blasted through in a certain way, but kind of really. And even like some of the Nyingma teachers, Kagyu teachers, who go and say, this is Mahamudra, the great seal, this is, you know, great perfection, and we shortcut all that stuff with the Mandala, all of this. No, they don't. They talk about that, and which is great, and they give a vision of what's possible to inspire someone to develop enthusiasm. And then they say, oh, actually, you have to start with a few preliminaries. The ngondro. And then the preliminaries are 100,000 bows in a certain way, you know, with a certain meditation. 100,000 guru pujas, 100,000 mandala offerings, 100,000 making dharmas, 100,000 this and that and other, and learning all renunciation, bodhi mind, you know. So the first one is just sort of showing the goal, which is worthy. Because it creates people, you know, enthusiasm. But if any of them teach it that now just because I said so, you have great perfection, they are deceiving the student, actually. Or it's like if anybody says, oh, you read the Perfection Stage book, you can do that. You'll be in Yoganada, just go out and find a partner and go to Hawaii and have sex. That's deceiving the student. No person with ordinary because this is like much more than psychotherapy. This is going to the total unconscious. down to where you feel like, I have to have the next breath. It's an automatic thing. I have to keep breathing. Krishna Das told a wonderful story of his teacher, who they were there in Vrindavan, the holy place for the Krishna people. Because his teacher was a Hanuman yogi, but obviously also he was secretly a kind of tantrika, Shaivite tantrika, for sure. He had miracle level. And he went there, and they were somewhere, and then they met some other Westerner who was not one of their students, who was kind of a little bit pompous type. And he was like, I'm meditating. It was like this, and he wasn't paying attention. They came into some temple, and he wasn't like being courteous or friendly or whatever. And he was like, don't bother, I'm meditating. So then that guru, Nim Karoli Bhaba, who was a wonderful man, his motto was love everybody. And the guru said, interrupted the meditator actually, which there was a couple of Western students with him, and they were surprised. Usually he would leave someone like that alone, but he interrupted through another Hindu guy. He was with him, one of his students, advanced student. And he said, ask him what he's doing. And I said, what do you mean, what am I doing? I'm meditating. And then he said, well, do you really know how to meditate? Yes, I know how. And then he said, well, you want to see someone who really knows how to meditate? He says, like, I doubt it. He said, the guy was a little offended. He said, well, but don't take my word for it. Do you want to see someone who really knows how to meditate? He said, yeah. Then he sort of had to say, yeah, the guy, because he'd already been distracted. So then this little old guy who was with him, who was translating, who knew English, Guru Dada, I think they called him. He said, then this guy, the yogi, this guru didn't meditate himself. He said, okay, Guru Dada, you meditate, show him meditation. So then Guru Dada he goes into meditation, sitting there on the floor. Not too perfect, yogically, just sitting there. And then he said, okay, he's now meditating. See if you can push him. And this big guy gets up, who was the big meditator, and he says, you too, you guys, and Krishna Das and some other guy he brought with him, who were the disciples of the guru. See if you can push him. And the three of them were pushing and pulling, and they couldn't budge the guy. They couldn't lift him, they couldn't budge him. He was like a huge stone. He was a little light guy, skinny Indian guy, maybe 50 or 60, 55 years old. 60. Couldn't budge him. He was like a rock. And they were like, uh-oh. And then they said, look, put your hand in his face. And they did. And you see he's not breathing. You're right. There was no respiration. So he left them like that, and they were like, oh, wow, they were really freaking out. So then he said, okay, now that's enough. 15 minutes, something later. And then he said to Krishna Das and his disciple, not to the guy he was sort of giving a lesson to. He said, okay, now you guys pick him up. Now you can pick him up. You pick him up and carry him over into the next room or something. So then Krishna Das and the guy go and they could pick him up, but he stayed absolutely immobile. But they picked him up and carried him to the next room. And then the guru himself went into the next room with him, and they closed the door, and they stayed there for half an hour while it sank into the guy who was meditating, who was the big meditator. And then the guy walked out normally and talked to him. Then he did it again. And then he says, oh, you think that was the fluke? You want him to do it again? And then he did it again. And then they couldn't push him. They couldn't pick him up. Oh, I couldn't believe that. I did believe it. Krishna Das wouldn't make it up, actually. Really something special. That wasn't even Buddhist. They weren't Buddhists, right? They were real yogis, though. They were siddhas, adepts. The mind is really powerful. It's the trigger of things that the body does, not the brain, the mind. And it can use the whole body in an amazing way, apparently. I never saw that. If I saw that, I might vomit like hell. I'd have to run out and vomit like Carlos Castaneda, because I'm just a New Yorker, I didn't hang around with that guru, to my great regret. And Dalai Lama didn't show off any kind of thing like that, There are things like that. They have these lamas who are expert in that, elderly ones. And Dalai Lama has a SWAT team in Munich where they have portable fMRIs and machinery and the whole thing. And a bunch of neuroscientists, some from America and some from there, are ready to go when some lama dies. and sits for 2 weeks without breathing, but without collapsing and without the flesh decaying at all. It's right in a kind of halo of luminosity, sometimes for as long as a couple of weeks, or in the old days maybe a couple of months, but 3 weeks, or only in 1981, his senior teacher was there for about a month. And the Dalai was like, well, I don't think it lasts long enough, the team might not arrive in time. He makes a joke and he says, but I don't think I can ask them to pre-schedule. That wouldn't be ethical. You can see he wants to. Okay, you guys, you die on that date and you guys get over there and be there. But he says, I guess I can't do that. Okay, I think time is up. Is that right? Okay, so thank you very much, everybody, and enjoy. And you can read chapters 8 and 9 from my Central Buddhism, which is online, or if you have the book, you can find, some of you who have studied with me before have that book. It's you can get it, I think there's an ebook even for $5-10. I'm sorry, I don't have them to give out. It may even be out of print, the hard copy, I don't know. Okay? And they're just there as samples and whatever. And next time, I think, I'm going to talk on perfection stage on the 30th, and I will also read a bit, I'll set it up and I'll read a bit from the first chapter of the Esoteric Community, because it's quite beautiful, just the Vajra words, a little bit. I'll read that with you. I don't think I'll put it up, but I'll read it with you. Okay? Thanks a lot.